Pure crazy, but it's all right. We're having fun.
Welcome to everybody in Facebook land. Welcome to the Truth
What?
Reveal podcast. Hello, everyone. Say hello, everyone.
Hello.
Yay. So, welcome to the Truth Reveal podcast. I will be your host tonight. My name is Latricia, aka Sweet. So first of all, I just want to give you guys some background about what Truth Reveal is about. So the purpose of Truth Reveal is we host conversations that relate in order to reconcile as we uncover God's truth. Tonight, we're going to be talking about a sensitive topic. So we do want to put some disclaimers out there. We are talking about a very sensitive topic in today's culture, in today's church, and that topic is race. And so we want to ask one that everyone extends grace as we have this very delicate conversation, and just be mindful of your comments and what you're saying. And if you want to show yourself, we do have moderators in the room that will remove you. But we do want to have, open and honest dialogue, but we also want to do that in a very respectful manner. So we're going to have a section of this podcast where it's going to be open for question and answer, and that'll be towards the latter part. So if you're on here and you're live, watching via Facebook, we're just asking that you keep your questions towards your end. Remember what it is, jot it down, whatever the case may be, and then we will tackle that towards the end. So at this time, I would like to introduce our guest for this evening to help us dig in to discussing race and the church. The first guest I would like to introduce is the one and only Gena Thomas.
Yeah.
Yay. Hey, everyone.
Gena is a world-renowned author.
Oh, yeah.
Separated by the Border. Get your copy. She's a friend of mine and a sister. She's a social activist, and she always has good knowledge and things to say. So thank you so much, Gena, for being a part.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Our next guest is James and Linette Colwell. Say hey, y'all.
Yeah.
Hey.
James and Linette Colwell are coming to us all the way from Indiana. I actually know Linette a little bit more than I know James, but they are a married couple raising 2 children, and so we definitely want to get their perspective. What is it like being in an interracial couple and being an interracial family and raising your kids in this crazy world? And last and certainly not least, we have with us the Antoine Lassiter.
The Antoine.
Yeah.
The Antoine Lassiter. Antoine is a friend and a brother, and my pastor. He pastors Think Kingdom Church in Kannapolis, North Carolina. He's good people, and I'm very glad to have him be a part of this conversation. He wants to be a comedian in his next life.
Wow. Okay, I'll take that.
Well, he's always trying to do his little comedy sets doing his sermons. Bless his heart. Anyway, so we're gonna have fun, but we do want to talk about this topic. So first of all, thank you guys so much, honestly and sincerely, for being a part. We just appreciate you taking one time out of your schedule to have this conversation, time out of your schedule to just be open and transparent. And we hope that from our listeners and all those that are going to be taking part, that we all leave more enlightened, more understanding, and just having a better understanding about race, our part as believers, and the part that the church plays and what we can do. So I'll start off by just asking our guests, and just for sake of just keeping it flowing, I'll say Gena, Linette, and then Antoine. If you guys can just give us like a general awareness or of racism or your experience. And when I mean general awareness, like that first moment that you were aware that racism is something that's taking place, or, you know, it could be something as early as your childhood, or just when you came to the realization that there is a difference in the races.
Yeah, so when I was about 4 years old, my mom, her best friend is African American, and I remember asking her why her skin color was different than ours. And really, there wasn't a whole lot of other conversations surrounding that. But I, at the time, lived in upstate New York. So it's a very different world. I would say that racism certainly still exists there, as it does here in the South. But moving to the South was very eye-opening to see the segregation that still exists in a way that it doesn't in New York, or at least
when did you move?
Where I live.
I'm sorry. When did you move to the South, Gena?
I was 12.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got you. James, Linette?
What's your first experience?
So my first experience would have been probably sixth grade, you know, so 12 years old. You know, being raised like in the county that I live in, Southern Indiana, you know, 25,000 people. It's a small county, and literally 99.9% white.
Wow.
99.99875 is white.
Oh, Lord.
And so, you know, being raised, you know, my experience with, you know, the black culture or anything was related to sports, playing basketball. You know, my school, all white, you know, but for AAU basketball, you know, that you know, we were very, you know, multicultural basketball team because, you know, and it's still like it is today, where you could have players from different schools playing. And my first experience, you know, with the racism was on one of my sixth grade AAU basketball teams, when one of the players on our team, and his dad was a coach, called another kid on the team, dropped the N-word right there. Mm. And knew growing up, I didn't get exposed to that, didn't hear it from my family, but knew, no, that's beyond what you could ever call. And I remember immediately left practice, told my dad, and he was like, nope, you're done. He was like, do you want to play? And I was like, no. That was my first real life experience that, wow, you know, you know it exists. You grew up not being exposed to it, thankfully. But when it really happened, you know, in that present time in front of you with, you know, with players on your team, it was just, you know, at a young age, that would have been my first experience with
Wow.
it. That still, I mean, we just talked about this probably a few weeks ago, that I remember that. And, you know, being 12 years old, obviously that puts you in an uncomfortable situation, but
right.
Even just, but everybody else on the team was no big deal. You know, that's
wow.
That's how we talk to each other. No, I was not raised like that or exposed to it. So it was something new to me, and, you know, very encouraging.
Got you. What about you, Linette?
I was thinking probably the very first time, because I grew up in Vail. So,
now explain that for the people who have no concept of Vail.
That's God's country. So that's how we No, Vail is it's Catawba County. So there are two parts of Vail. There's a Lincoln County and there's a Catawba County. And it's I grew up not far from a farm. So it's real rural, as anybody would say. It's extremely country, country. So that's where I grew up. And in my neighborhood on the hill, everybody was Black. There might have been a couple white people, but mostly everybody was Black. So I went to schools where it was a predominantly white environment. But I was just telling James not long ago, I don't remember having as many issues. I was never called out of my name at my school. I played sports, might have been the only Black person on the team a lot of times, you know. So, but now that you ask about our youngest memory of something like that, or like realization of racism, I would say my very first time that I knew or I felt uneasy was probably between second and fourth grade. I don't know which one it was, but it was based off of, we were looking at a map and Niger, you know, the Niger.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I remember one of the kids in my class started to laugh. Like nobody had said the word yet. They just saw it. And one of the kids began to laugh and like kind of kiki with another one of the kids. And at that moment, I immediately felt like they think it's the N-word. So they think that's funny. No one mentioned it and no one had ever called me that. But that was like, I was kind of like, I know what they're thinking. So because I don't remember any kids really being that way in elementary school or middle school, but I felt uncomfortable with that. And it was like, that shouldn't even have been something I was uncomfortable with, but I knew, I didn't know what they were thinking, but in my mind, I was like, they are thinking that's funny because of this.
Right.
So that was probably my earliest, like, uncomfortable feeling of racism. And it wasn't even racism.
Yeah. And for those who don't know, Vail is located in the great state of North Carolina.
Oh, yeah. I'm sorry.
Vail, North Carolina.
Yeah.
Antoine, tell us about your experience.
For me,
Your
it
earliest
was,
one.
I think it's for me, it was, I think I was young. I think maybe middle school. And we were
Middle
at
school?
a gas station that had like a game room, or it had a couple of those, the games. And my younger brother, he was playing the game, and like I think he was real good at the game or something. And there was a white kid that wanted to play, but my brother kept winning. And so his dad came along, the kid's dad came along and was trying to get my brother to hurry up. And he said, he never did, but he said his son kept crying. They had to leave. But before the father left, he said, we don't want to play with that anyway unless we wipe it down. And I couldn't figure out like what that meant. Like it didn't make sense to me, but I remember having a conversation with my dad later on about it. And it just threw me off. Like, why would he say that? So that was my first, I couldn't, because I think I was maybe sixth grade, but because I couldn't, I think I didn't have the faculties at the time to really digest it. So when I look back, that was my first experience with it.
Got you. April or Holly, do you guys have experiences that you recall growing up where you came to that realization that there was a difference or a separation?
I think my first memories probably would have been when it came to dolls, like seeing that there weren't that many Black dolls at the time, and just kind of getting socialized to think that there was only one way of beauty through the things that you would see in the store. So that's basically the earliest memory that I have, that would be either that or television, not seeing us really represented on television and wondering why what difference was there, or seeing a doll and all I saw was white dolls and wondering why is it one that looks like me.
Right. Got you.
Yeah.
What about you, April?
Well, mine's a kind of a funny story. I didn't have any where anything happened to me particular. I grew up in a military family. We're from North Carolina. My people are from Rocky Mount, but in the military, I was exposed to a lot of interracial couples and all of that. But funny, my first time I thought about race was looking at my favorite book. My mom had bought me a book of Bible stories. And I remember being a little girl, and it was like a bound together book, and it had the pictures and everything. And I loved that book. And I was sitting in my room, and I literally was looking at all the pictures, and I said, And I didn't feel a bad way. I was like, I wonder when God made Black people.
Mm,
I said that because I thought,
wow.
I didn't ask my mom or anything. I
Mm,
just saw all the white people in the stories, and I was like, oh, well, I wonder when we came.
Wow.
That was
mm,
my
Wow.
first time.
How old do
wow.
you think you were?
I had to have been about 6 or 7, 7,
Wow.
Mm.
Mm,
or maybe
wow.
maybe 8, because I could read the whole thing on my own, like 7 or 8 somewhere.
Oh, okay, so you were able to read. My first experience was, I'll never forget this. I was in Head Start, or pre-K as they call it now. And I'm country. I'm like Linette. We're from the country. Now, she's a little bit more country than where I'm from. We had like street.
Ah!
Yeah. Vale is way countryer than Shelby. I mean, Shelby is country too. But I grew up country, and I grew up being raised by my grandmother. So there's that, just growing up country and old, so I mean, I was literally raised by my grandmother, and my great grandmother lived in the house. So I'm a country girl, cornbread, collard greens, and fatback. That's a whole meal. And
Oh my.
so I was, oh my.
High blood pressure.
So I was at school, and I don't remember what we were eating. I don't remember the specifics that deep of what happened, but I do remember I was at school, I was eating lunch, and there was, I don't know, whatever the meal was, it had some juices with it, and they had given us rolls. And remember, I told y'all I'm country. So I was taking the biscuit, the roll, and it's a word called stop.
Popping it up.
Stopping up I was stopping up the juice of whatever we were eating. And I remember as clear as this day, and I'm not one for remembering names, but I remember her name. Her name was Miss Strickland. She was a teacher's aide. She wasn't even a teacher. And she said to me, white people don't eat their food like that. Black people do. Now, in that moment, I was like, I mean, I didn't stop eating, but it was enough for me that even at a very young age, I didn't think it was right. So I went home and told my mom and my grandmother what the teacher had said. Needless to say, if anybody knows my mama, she went to the school the next day and turned it all the way out.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Because I was in like Head Start.
Wow.
And I was thinking, like, just listening to you guys all share your stories, I can't remember what I did the day before, but it's like certain things happen in your life, and they are so engraved in you that you have no choice but to bring them back to your remembrance. And I think that's what race is, and that's what racism has done. That at 41, I can remember something that happened 35 years ago as a kid with a lot of clarity. So I think it just shows like how this subject and this sin, because it is America's oldest and biggest sin, the sin of racism, has really played out in all of our lives. So I know Gena is if there was a Justice League, it would be like Gena would definitely be a part of it.
Yeah.
There is a Justice League, but I'm just saying I was thinking about Marvel. So Gena, give us some experiences like with your work with social justice, and what that experience has been like in evangelical settings as it pertains to social justice and racism.
Yeah, so I would say that I want to give at least one positive example, because the reason that I even know y'all and Antoine is because Andrew and I went to a conference, a Missio Alliance conference a couple of years ago, and we really were interested in racial justice and really trying to figure out what we can do to be a part. And there were several, those who were speaking at the conference were it was a very diverse group of speakers, which first of all is not the norm. I wish it was, but it's not. And secondly, there were several pastors of color who were saying that if you are a white person, you really want to do something about this, learn how to be under the leadership of people of color. And that really changed the course of direction for us, and thankfully brought us into a relationship with you beautiful people, specifically folks at Think Kingdom. So that was a very positive experience, but I would say that a lot of experience generally in white evangelical spaces is, as I'm sure you all have heard, it's not a skin problem, it's a sin problem, and all the silly little tropes that we have. And unfortunately, I think even in the spaces that seem as if things are changing, and one particular church that we were a part of for a while had quite a few people of color on staff, but when you dug underneath the surface of it, a lot of that was tokenism, in the sense that their voices, while they were heard, they were never listened to.
Wow.
And that is really, I think, the thing that's saddest. And in some situations, it's hard to see that that's happening right away when you first enter a new church. But as we started to build more relationships with those who were on staff that were people of color, it was very clear. And it just made us really, really sad to see that happen. And so really for me, where I start with all this stuff is going back to the beginning in the Bible and talk about justice. What does justice look like? What does it mean? Where does it come from? And Isaiah 42 lays out a picture of who Jesus was going to be, and he was called to justice. And so I think really trying to change that, the whole language around what is justice. It's not just this negative term. It's not just this term for people who are outside of the church. It is a term. It is a calling. It's something that we have and we need to go for, and Christ is calling us to it. So that's where my heartbeat is.
Yes. Very
Awesome.
good. Thank you. Antoine, so you're my pastor, but you also pastor a multicultural church as a African-American man. What is your experience, one, in that setting, and two, what is your experience when you're dealing with race in some of your groups or your sets of individuals that you interact with?
Well, it's I concur with Gena on the premise that sometimes we have to get past language, because anytime you can't agree on definitions, people put a wall up. So so somebody could be watching and saying, okay, racial justice. Well, justice should be colorblind. You're absolutely right. But we're living in a culture that it isn't. So we parse words a lot. And so what ends up happening is we even have demonized, social justice and social justice warriors. And so we keep parsing these words. But the key to it is the biblical definition of justice. So however it plays out, we have to agree upon that there is a segment of the population that does not get a fair ... So I think to your point, I do pastor a multi-ethnic church, and initially I recognized early that there were landmines that I was very careful about.
Wow.
And to be honest, and this is what I want to talk to the pastors who are watching, because I'm just going to be straightforward and honest.
Please.
So when we merged, a predominantly Black church with a predominantly white church, it was months before, good, bad, or indifferent, the Trump era. So then you had the death of the African-American Keith Lamont Scott. So now I'm a Black pastor in a multi-ethnic space, and I'm trying to not only merge two cultures, but I'm also trying to navigate spaces where people will extend grace to me, and it was a hard thing. So And this is why I'm here tonight, because what I did not do, I mourn because I didn't speak to the issues of race.
Mm.
And the reason why I
Mm.
didn't do that is because I was literally trying to survive. And
Wow.
Wow.
the Titanic is sinking, and now you're
Mm.
bringing up issues that are divided, and it's hard to deal with. So many of us don't want to be in spaces,
Mm.
regardless of the conversation.
It's
We don't
true.
want to be in spaces where we are uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if I step to the left, I'm too black. If I step to the right, I'm not black enough.
Mm.
So I'm having to navigate these spaces. And it's
Wow.
only until I realize that my obligation is
Uh-oh.
first to God, and to
Mm-hmm.
speak to the issues that are affecting the people I'm pastoring. So
Mm.
Mm.
oftentimes when you go in spaces when you go into spaces, the challenge that we all have in these spaces is trying to be all things to all people, but
Mm.
not to win them to Jesus, but to placate their own comfort. So
Mm.
if I start
Wow.
standing and I'm offending
Mm.
my African American congregants, it's lonely. But if then I start standing and I
Mm.
offend my white congregants, um, I'm lonely. So the
Mm.
premise, I guess the thing that I did and I rationalized was I don't see color. Well, that's a lie. That's stupid. Like,
Mm.
Right.
why would God make color for us not to see it?
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
and so I had to really understand what my purpose and calling was. So if I'm a white pastor, black pastor or not, what I have to be careful about is that I don't look at the faces of the people I pastor. And so those faces
Mm.
determine the what I preach. So
Wow.
if it's socioeconomic issues, I don't preach about how to biblically handle your money. If it's gender issues, I don't speak about it because I don't want to offend. If it's sexuality, and this is what I was talking
Mm.
to you about, Sweet, that it's my gap theory. If the church does not talk about race, the world
Mm.
will, and
That's
the
right.
world will talk
Mm. Yes.
about it from a world view. So if the
Yeah.
church doesn't talk about sexuality, the world would talk about sexuality. So
Mm-hmm.
that gap would be filled or filled with folks who don't have a biblical view. So we label people to keep from digging deeper into what
Mm.
the core of the matter is. So I
My
get
God.
past definitions. I get past the buzz and words, but we have to get to the core. And I think I stole this from Gena by way of Sweet. That we have to leave room to be offended.
Yeah.
So
Oh
if
my.
Christ brings us to the table, then Christ is enough. While sitting
Mm.
at that table, we have to have hard conversations. Because I'm not
Yeah.
trying to grow with people that look like the world. I'm trying to grow with people that look like the kingdom. So we have to
Mm.
confront these issues that we're not dealing with, because
Mm.
we're talking about it. We're just talking about it in the safety and the comfort of our homes. At the
Yeah.
end of the day, um, I I acutely know I'm a pastor, I'm a husband, I'm a father, I'm a friend, I'm a brother, I'm a son. But to some, I'm a black man. And so I can't deny that the world will see my color and hide
Mm.
behind the lens of the church. I have
Mm.
to
Mm.
speak truth wherever I go in my reality. And this is, I'm gonna shut up, but
No, you
we
talking
don't
good.
know we don't know how to mourn with people.
Mm.
So we try to set definitions and cultures in its proper place. But can't you just mourn with me? Can you weep with
Right.
me? Do we have to wait
Mm.
until the more facts come out? Can we cry
Come
together
on.
and see
Yeah.
the loss of life? Can we just mourn and just say, wow, somebody died? And what we're doing is we're so polarized that we are
Mm.
losing our humanity. It's
Mm-hmm.
They
Mm.
will not
My God.
know that we are disciples by our doctrine. They will know
Mm.
that we
No,
are
by
Jesus
our love.
disciples by
Yes.
our
By our
love. So
love.
we don't even know
Yes.
how to love anymore. We don't even know how to see a
Wow.
black. We don't even see. We don't even know how to see a black man being killed. Forget
Mm.
about race for a second. We don't even know how to see it and mourn. Like, oh
Yeah.
my God, I don't need to know the more facts. I see death, and we don't even mourn that. And so we're living in a time of the church where we don't even mourn loss anymore. We try to rationalize, well, what did he do? He died. That's what he
Lord
did.
have mercy.
And
What
so
did he
we don't
do?
have that. We don't have that awareness anymore. And I
Yeah.
think that's why the world, unfortunately, is taking the place. Because if the church doesn't talk about it, if I don't talk about sex with my boys, they're going to learn about sex. If I don't talk about race with my children, they're going to learn about it. So me being in the position that I am with the audience, be it 8 people or 8,000, they give me a platform by the grace of God to speak truth. And sometimes, as my grandmother used to say, truth hurts.
My Lord,
A whole
today.
mouthful. A whole mouthful.
And Antoine,
Linette.
I think, sorry, real quick,
No, go ahead.
Antoine, what you were saying about if we don't talk about it, I think what's happening a lot of times in white evangelical churches is that the saying it's a sin problem or we just need to get back to the gospel is their idea of talking about it, and that's the problem, is that that's not talking about it. That's not sufficient, and everyone, those who are curious, will then go and find others who are actually having a conversation.
Right. Let me speak to that. Let me speak to that real quick, and that's the problem. Like, so instead of saying, "Hey, this is hard. I don't know. I need help," because we don't dig deeper, we don't go deeper. So so it's like Gena was saying, it's sin. Okay, it is. So how are we going to deal with it? Like, how are we going to deal with the sin? And so sometimes what I do, and many of us do, we offer answers before we hear the question. So when something happens that shock us, it's Job chapter 2-3. It's when Job's friends came, they sat with him. Before they offered a discourse, before they tried to explain it away, before they made this broad category and sanitize it, they sat with him. And what we fail to do sometimes is sit with people. I grew up in a culture where one person had to have the answers. Well, that's not true. No one person has the answer outside of Jesus.
Yeah.
And so the reason why we don't have these conversations, the reason why we keep pushing it, and then we say, you know what, I'm called to preach the gospel, then follow what Jesus did. Jesus spoke to the issues of the day. So he didn't run through it. See, I see pastors as firemen. We run into the fire, not out of it. And so if we don't talk about these fire topics, then I'm going to base my theology on a world view. And this is the opportunity for the church to say, listen, sin is wrong, absolutely. But this is how sin manifests. Sin manifests in racism. Sin manifests in people. I got to deal with my own sins before I deal with yours. So maybe I'm not dealing with it because I haven't dealt with my own sin. So I'm not going to talk about something that I'm dealing with at the moment. And because we're not authentic and because we're not truth bearers, we become false tellers. So we have to play this game where we skirt around the truth, because what I want is the truth. If my marriage sucks, don't placate me. Tell me where I am, and that is what sometimes we fail to do. Now, I didn't come in here.
All right.
I apologize.
Yeah.
But
Preach.
my point is, that's what it is.
That's what it is. That's your point.
That's what it is.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. That was a good point.
Yes.
Linette and James, you guys are unique in the sense of you guys are obviously an interracial couple living out it.
Yeah.
I mean, kind of, sort of. Kind of, sort of. Nah. But, you know, like, you're in this Indiana kind of rural area. I know we've had some conversations. And then you obviously have, well, not obviously, because everyone doesn't know that you have 2 children. So what is your experience like as this couple raising children in this hyper racial world, trying to be balanced, trying to make sure that they're appreciative of both their cultures, and you're Christians and you're servants, you know, you're serving your church. What is that like for you guys?
Well, if we could go back real quick to what Antoine was talking about, as far as the church kind of like skirts away from the issue. You know, it's a sin problem. And James and I have had this conversation, not about the church, but about if there's ever a time that I've had to deal with racism. And then I'm upset about it because it makes me angry. And so there's been conversations where I've talked to him and I'll tell him, you'll never understand what I feel like, because he doesn't. And and he will agree with me instead of saying, it's going to be fine. He agrees, and he'll say, I don't know what it feels like when you and the kids walk in a store and someone says something, or someone's disrespectful, or someone's a racist, like, because he doesn't receive that same treatment. So in the church, I think a lot of times pastors or members or people inside the church don't talk about it because they can't understand it, because they've never experienced it. And when you don't experience a thing, either personally or in your family or someone around you, when you don't experience it, I don't know how to feel. I may not even be empathetic, because how can I show empathy towards something that doesn't affect me and may never affect me?
Wow.
So
That's true.
So it makes it very difficult, I mean, as a family, because we've had issues where there's things that I go through on a regular basis, not only being a Black woman, but not only being Black, but being a woman, being educated, you know, and at one point being a professional. There's things that I will go through that he'll never go through. And it'll never cross his mind outside of my wife might be dealing with it. Because as a white male, you know, we're talking about the top. It doesn't matter socioeconomic. It doesn't matter anything. As a white male in America, he's right here. And then everything else trickles down. So that's one reason why I think the church has a difficult time dealing with racism, the white, like the predominantly white churches, because they have leaders and people in those churches that will never know how it feels to experience that. So they don't know how to be empathetic, because we as Black people, we know how to be empathetic for other races and cultures that go through things, because we probably already been through it, you know? Just to speak on that point right there, that's something that we've had to deal with in a social realm, not talking about the church. And as far as for our family, I would say the first time he and I had dealt with like racism as a couple, and it was when I came to Indiana one Christmas, so 1998, because we've been together like that long. So in 98, I came up here. So in 98, I came here, and they had a mall at the time. It was this giant mall, and I can remember going into the mall, and we were walking together, and there was a Black girl that walked past us, because you know for those that don't know, it's different whenever there's like I feel like sometimes I get more heat being with a white man than sometimes, because it's not as, people don't see it as often as you might see a white female with a Black male. So from my sister, you know, I got this so she likes vanilla. I was like, at that time, you know, I might not have been saved and sanctified.
Oh
so
my!
I was like,
You told him.
He was like, it's fine. I was so.
Wow.
For me at that time, I'm a college student, and I'm like, really? Like, what does that mean? Like, I can't. Even though I liked vanilla, but I didn't want her to be the way she said it. You know, the way she said it offended me, because I was like, how are you gonna call me out? Like, it's not that big of a deal. So that was probably together a person of our age, like in our age group, because you know there were always older people.
Yeah, we would get especially in college.
In Shelby.
Go out to eat, go to the mall in Shelby.
We went to Gardner Webb.
Yeah, we went to Gardner Webb.
That's where we met.
We would, it was obviously the much older generation that would give us that look or that stare. And it's like, and she would notice it because, me being a guy that, you know, you call it naive or whatever, she's got those eyes and those ears constantly looking for it in case it's happening. She'd be like, did you hear what they whispered? Or did you? No, I'm sorry, I didn't. And she'd tell me, she'd be one of them well, it's probably a good thing. I didn't hear that or do this and that, but, you know, and then getting back to, you know, the topic of, you know, with me not being able to, you know how she feels or anything. And we've had some, you know, we have really, you know, butted heads over that, because obviously we're two totally different sides when we're talking race and our experiences. And, you know, I've been aggressive with her and my stance, and obviously her back with, you know, her side. You will never understand. And then my stance is always, okay, when I say I understand how you feel when they said that or they treated you this way. I understand on a level of comprehension and being sympathetic and being a human being, you know, with love and compassion. I can never say I know how you feel. I understand. And then she would come back to, no, you can't understand it if you don't experience it. And that's where we kind of clashed of, you're taking it from one point of view, I'm taking it from another. I understand completely. If I didn't understand, I would say, I don't care. It doesn't matter to me. You've experienced it or whatever. I can't say I know how you feel, because I am not in her shoes. I'm not experienced. I have not experienced that. So I don't know how she feels, but I can say, I understand that you're broken, that it just, you know, just cut you to the core when you experience that. I don't know how it felt. I'm sure, and I understand that it feels horrible, but yeah, I don't know how you feel or have felt when things like that happen.
And what we do with our kids, I mean, Sweet, like we talked about earlier, when they were very small, well, probably till 4 or 5, they were extremely pale. So there were many instances where I was the nanny, you know. So it's like, who's babies? You know, we're walking at Walmart, or I'm rolling them around because they just didn't look, at that point, they didn't look interracial at all, biracial at all. So Sweet, what we were talking about, like they were passers, you know, at that point. So, but they didn't know. So they had no clue of the skin color, because before we moved here, we lived in Hickory, and, you know, my parents were there, all of our family. And then we went to a multicultural church, and there were interracial relationships there. So it wasn't a thing we talked about, but it was just something that you would hear, you know, in the background with the kids. When we moved here,
they were 4 and 3. Yeah.
No, 2 and 3.
2 and 3. Yeah.
Yeah. So when we moved here, the older they got, they would go to parks, and how they were treated with him would be different than how they were treated with me. And then when we were all 4 together, it would be different too. So we've just had to navigate that. And then I think the first time I realized that one of my children understood
racism involving the kids.
Well, with color, just color. We, because we live in a predominantly white environment, I had taken our daughter into a little speedway, like a gas station. And she said, she was so little, I just remember, she was able to speak, and she goes, there was a Black lady and like her daughter that came in, and they were older. And she goes, Rowan was like, look, mommy, there's Black people. Like, that baby was excited.
Oh, wow.
She was excited. So, and at that moment, I never knew that she actually knew the difference, because we don't speak about it. But to her, because she was probably always listening, she always does, she probably had heard, you know, Black, white, brown, but it was so shocking. And I remember as I'm holding her, I remember being like, be quiet, you know. Because I didn't want them to know that we were the only ones there, like the people that were traveling. And I was just like, oh my gosh, I can't believe she said it. So that's the first time I think that she mentioned something like that. And she was little, like she wasn't in elementary school yet. So we've had to discuss color, because we've ran into racism in the schools, because you know, there's generations of racist people here, and no matter what it is. And when I worked in the community, I ran into racism because I worked for mental health, and I worked as a social worker in this community. And so when I had to go into homes, and I had to see rebel flags and KKK type things, and people that I knew hated me because of my color. They had no idea what type of person I was. But when I was working at mental health, I dealt with children and social skills. So I did social skill groups with kids. And the children here it was just kind of like underdeveloped. So we worked on things so much as ordering food and we live on an exit that's like 30 minutes north of Louisville. So there have been children that had never been to Louisville, which is 30 minutes away. They'd never crossed the bridge. So they hadn't been to the mall. So we worked on social skills, and those people were kind of like hesitant to have me in their homes because I had to go into their homes. But when they realized that I was still helping their children, it made a difference. But when I first got here and worked with the community, they would like come up to my face. Like the kids, it was like I was a unicorn because they had never seen a Black person in person. Like on TV.
Wow.
But never like, and they were so little and they're so innocent, and they would just be like, "Oh, Miss Linette." So it was an eye opener. It was a culture shock, an eye opener, and that's what we've had to talk with our kids about. Because just last year, and this is our last story, just last year, this past school year, our son dealt with severe racism for 3 months, the beginning of the school year. We had no idea because he wasn't telling us. So on the bus and in school, on the bus, it was worse. There were these kids that would, instead of calling him by his name, they would call him the N-word. Now we told our kids that's not acceptable. Like, your name is this, your name is that. Like, you don't answer to anything but that. So
this thing, it was new to us. Don't know if it's existed, elsewhere, but these kids doing this, asking, the Black kids or the biracial kids of, hey, can I get the N-word pass?
Wow.
So that was something new, and it's like they're asking these kids for permission
to disrespect
them and it's like that's what we've resorted to. We are at this level where our kids, this young generation, is getting it from somewhere, or it's getting developed to where they want permission.
Wow.
We call them the N-word. And it's called, hey, can I get the N-word pass?
Yeah. So
wow.
He dealt with that in the school. And then on the bus, there was just blatant disrespect. And so for 3 months, so it was the beginning of school. So we're thinking, because there were things that he was doing that he was trying to change.
6th grade, first year of middle school.
Yep. So he's trying to, we thought it was just a transition issue, where he's mature in puberty, whatever, because he wanted to change his hair. He's got curly hair. He wanted to change his hair.
He started asking Linette to straighten his hair, use the flat iron and straighten his hair.
Yeah.
And again, at the time, it was, he's just wanting to be his own person. And then, not to interrupt you, but then as everything evolved and we started getting more and more information and realizing that he was around so many white kids. He wanted to look like them. He didn't want his curly hair. He didn't feel accepted.
Wow.
And it hurt.
It was hard because, when you have like beautiful people, like we try to show them all the aspects of the world. And it was so like heartbreaking because so the kids that were being good to him, like his friends, loved his curly hair. Everybody, the kids were trying to get perms to look like him. They'd be like, James, we love this, we love that. Kids are trying to get a tan. Okay.
Wow.
And so whenever he doesn't want a tan or want to go out because he doesn't want to get a tan, it was like, buddy, but you're fine. So we had to go to the school and we had to talk about it because it makes you, what called me to the school, what happened was I had to go to the school because the counselor called me and said, you have to come right now. Jameson said, I just want to kill myself in class.
No.
And another kid heard it. And so because that kid heard it, they went to the counselor or the teacher. I'm not sure the counselor. And so the counselor was like, oh gosh, no. So this is probably the 3rd month. And we're still thinking, because we're pretty hard on the kids as far as we got grades, we want to make sure that we're doing the right things. And we were thinking, well, maybe we're too hard on him. Like, he was stressed out about work. And then finally he just broke and told us what was happening to him for 3 months. Now, since August, this is August, September, October, right? So these are the things that are going on. So then it all makes sense why he wants his hair straight, why he doesn't want to get outside, or if he's outside, he wants to wear a hat.
Wow.
And when we found out, it was like devastating, because we try to empower our children and let them know both sides of our cultures. I mean, from the hills of Kentucky to the country back in North Carolina to where we live right now. We try to take them to different places to be cultured. Even though we live in a predominantly white area, we try to take them places so that they're around other children, so that they actually know how to interact with other races. And, you know, so to have this happen, and then to have people be upset because we were taking steps as a parent to be like, stay away from my child, because what our son told us, because when I asked, my first thing was, well, did you not tell anybody? And he said, well, I couldn't. They're not going to do anything anyway. Wow. So we have this child that has strong, like a high self-esteem around us. He's an athlete. People love him. Kids love him. We go to church and he's loved. But at school, he felt insecure. And he didn't feel safe on the bus. He didn't feel like the bus driver would do anything. He didn't feel like his teachers would do anything. And that bothered us, because we're in communication with his teachers on a regular basis. You know, when we're talking about grades, whatever the situation may be. And to find out that it had gotten to the point, because, you know, you see it on the news, you see people's kids that have committed suicide because of bullying. Like, that's horrible. You know, I can't believe it. But then here we are. We're those people that this child says, I just don't want to live. I mean, I don't want to. And we're thinking it's us, the stress of our parenting, when in actuality it's because he has nobody to look like him. And when I asked him, why didn't you do it? Why didn't you tell us or tell someone? He said, because I wanted friends. So there's nobody else like me. Like, there's no one else that would around me. So if they're going to pick on me, then I'm going to laugh at them. And I'm just going to be like, if I can't beat them, I'm going to join them. That was the mentality. Wow. So even at the school, he allowed them to call him that, because he called them his friends. And I remember sitting in the principal's office, and I remember saying, they're not your friends. And the principal would say to me, you know, they call each other friends. And I remember telling her, I was like adamant, they're not his friends. Because if you have to ask permission for something, then you know it's not right.
That's right.
If you're asking my son for permission to call him a name, and I don't care if it ends in an ER, if it ends in an A, it's not right. It's disrespectful. I don't care if you hear somebody that looks like me say it, it's unacceptable.
It is.
So that's our most recent issue. And our daughter is a little bit more like me. Like, she will let you know, my name is Rowan, don't call me anything else.
She will fight.
And she takes it from her brother. She'll play. So she heard anything like that on the bus, because I think what was happening was they were sitting in different spaces on the bus. So I don't think she heard it. I think she heard it once after we had recognized there was an issue, and she let us know, and he let us know as well. But it broke my heart to the point of when he said, I don't have friends and there's no one else like me. So I allowed this poor treatment to happen because I'm by myself, basically. Wow. So at that point, we knew we needed, even though as much as we were doing to culture our children and get them around other kids and other people like them, we knew we had to do something else, because it didn't matter what we were doing. No matter what efforts we were putting in place, our son still felt like, I'm alone and I don't want to be alone. I want to be with people. So I'm willing to accept unacceptable behavior and treatment to be a part of something. Wow. So that's why we feel like it's important that, and all of our friends that have reached out to us, we let them know, and they're like, I'm so sorry, because everybody's not that way here. Right. So we have to make them know that we have support. And they're like, well, what can I do? I've had somebody DM me, because I just recently talked about it on my Facebook page, and they were like, well, what can we do? And I told her, I said, what you can do is teach your children to love everybody. Like teach your children that it's okay, that we're going to be different and our color may be different, but be loving And I find myself saying that to her, but it's funny, when I was pregnant with Jameson, with our son, we were in North Carolina, and where my husband worked, he was over a high population of Hispanics. And so we became friends with them. And I remember one of them telling me while I'm pregnant, and he was like, will your baby know Spanish? Because James is fluent in Spanish. So he's like, will your baby know Spanish? And I was like,
So is Gena.
Oh, wow.
Well, maybe he will. And he's like, teach him Spanish so that my babies will have friends.
Wow.
And at that moment, it didn't affect me as much because I didn't have a physical baby yet. But I find myself 12 years later sharing with a Caucasian friend of mine, when she asked me, what can I do? I find myself telling her the same thing. Teach your children to be better.
Mm-hmm.
Because, I received racism living here by myself. And then we moved back to North Carolina, and then we had kids. So I was a little apprehensive to come here with children. But I dealt with it differently. And now as a mother, it hits a whole different way. Because you can do what you want to me. You hear your grandmama and your mamas and your aunties saying, you can do what you want to me, but you can't mess with my babies. And that's exactly how I feel. It's like, it's a whole nother level of emotion and hurt, because he literally was doing nothing. He was innocent. Like, we'd be on the bus or in class doing nothing but existing as they see him as Black. Because no matter how pale he is, his mama's Black. So he is. So him being there, existing, was what caused him to have the problem with them to have a problem with him. So that's he was just innocent. And that's what hurts me the most, is that he did nothing. He wasn't acting out. He wasn't loud. Wow. He just was being himself. And that created the issue.
And one of the experiences that, I mean, really, this, kind of, went to a whole new level. He had another situation on the bus, and I think this was one of the last situations that we had, because we were at the school, and the principal was wonderful. Yeah. And obviously, as principal of predominantly white middle school, when you have racism in the school that's happening, it's new. And plus, with us as parents, not sweeping it under the rug and telling your kid, it happens, you're just going to have to be thick-skinned.
Right.
It's going to happen. No, and so, one of the situations, and, and individuals that I've talked about with, other adults that told them, kind of the situation, get mixed reactions on, well, James, you went too far. You shouldn't have done that. And when I explain it, it's one of them where, this kid on the bus calling the N-word again, doing this and that. Jameson gets off the bus. We get in the truck. And because the kid's bus stop was after our bus stop.
Oh.
And I'm out of town.
She's out of town. And, this.
Thank the Lord.
Your love for your kids, and the flesh can be weak when you're under a situation. And instead of WWJD, what would Jesus do? It was one of them, WWJD, what would James do? And that James does sometimes. But we hopped in the truck. We went straight. He knew where the kid lived. Get off. And so we parked there. Kid gets off. I said, point the kid out to me. And don't know what they feed these kids these days, but this 8th grade kid was twice my size. I said, wow. I was like, that's the kid that was calling. It was like, yeah. I said, that's a grown man. He's like, he's in 8th grade. He's in 8th grade, Dad. And so I was like, okay. So he's standing there, and so I pull the truck up, and I ask him, what his name is, and he's like, yeah, and Jameson's in there, and Jameson is very uncomfortable, but I'm upset, and I confront the kid, in my truck, and I'm telling him, I said, you've been calling my son this. I said, that's disrespectful. I said, that shows a level of ignorance, just what dads would do in a situation like that when you're upset. And I asked him where his parents lived. I want to talk to their parents. I'm not telling you, and I told him just flat out, don't ever call my son, that again. Actually, don't ever talk to my son again, and left, and the principal ended up calling, was like, yeah, I can't believe you went and did that, and then the other parent, the dad, we met at the school, and he's like, what he did is wrong, but what you did, is poor taste and
was equally wrong.
Was equally wrong, and I can't believe you did that. That pretty much, that's you should have been a man and come to me and this and that. And I looked at him, I looked at the principal, and I told Linette. I don't know if I had told this to Linette. And I looked at them both and I said, listen, the situation
coming out now.
No, you can't find another parent. I said, let me know if there's another parent that has experienced this with their kids and tell me how they react. Because if you can find another parent that has went through this, let me know. And I would like to know how I said, but here's the situation I'm in and how my heart and how I acted on this is, if I didn't do that, or if I don't do this and stand up for my kids and set an example, that what if Jameson has a son or a daughter, and this happens to his son or a daughter, and his son or daughter comes to him and says, Dad, this is what happened to me. I said, I'm not going to have my son, Jameson, be in a position to where he looks at his son or daughter and says, you know what? That happened to me, and my dad didn't stand up for me and didn't confront the issue and didn't stand up for me. I said, I'm not going to allow my son to use me as an example of he didn't take up for me. I said, you know what? I could apologize to you for disrespecting you. I said, I can apologize to you 1,000,000 times for taking that action. I said, I will never put myself in a position to apologize to my son for not standing up for him and being a voice and being an example. And the room was quiet. There was no response. There was
silence in heaven.
I mean, it was just.
And he asked us, the stepdad, he was like, well, I don't know why it happens. I don't know where it's coming from. And I said, well, it has to come from somewhere.
Yeah.
And so
it's coming from somewhere.
It does. And he said, well, I don't understand. And I said, well, let me break it down to you this way, because I'll try to give it to you in a scenario where you may understand or you may empathize with it more. I said, imagine if you had a child that was physically or mentally handicapped. And that's something they can't control. They were born with it. They can't change it. They can't control it. They can't defend themselves from it. And so I said, imagine if they're on the bus and they have kids that are constantly calling them names over and over and over again, or hitting them in the back of the head, or just berating them over and over again, calling them, just anything. They can't defend themselves. Right. And then they come home to you and they say, Dad, this happened to me. You're going to be livid because your child can't walk. They can't raise their arms, but they're taking this abuse constantly over and over again to the point that they want to kill themselves. And I said, and then when they get home and you have to go to the school and you are irate, how would you expect for the person that you're meeting, the person who's the parent of the child that's doing that? How would you feel? Like,
and I think that's, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No. I was just saying he would be very, very upset. And then when I said that, I feel like it kind of like he understood better. Because when I say mentally handicapped, and I gave him the image of a wheelchair and a person that can't raise their arms to defend themselves or fight, and they're constantly being berated over something that they have no control over. That child cannot control the fact that he's mentally handicapped or physically handicapped, but yet he's being made fun of because of those things. You would be irate. And there's no reason but to defend them. And it's not over something they can control.
Right. And I think just to kind of segue into another conversation, or not another conversation, but a question. And this is something that Antoine brought up. He mentioned it, and something that you also mentioned, James. And I want Gena to talk about it and kind of go down the list, and anything that you guys want to share, Holly or April. But the question that I wanted to ask you guys, because this kid's father is like, I don't know where this comes from. And I believe that racism is taught. So for him to say he doesn't know where it's coming from is for him to take the easy route out. It's coming from you, sir. He's been exposed to it somewhere. So how does the church because we're all believers on this podcast, how does the church begin to have dialogue surrounding racial equality in a manner where we don't allow the world's culture to influence our opinions? Meaning, kind of what you were saying, Gena, sometimes it's like we go so far left where it's like we're just going to pray about it, or we go so far right that it becomes like a whole movement filtered through hatred. How do we find that that middle ground to having this very, very important conversation that we have to have and be that change? So I'll start with you, Gena, and then segue into Antoine.
Well, I think one of the important things for, and this is certainly church members that are white parents of white children, if you don't teach your kids about racism, they will learn racism. And I think that's the thing that we're not understanding and we're not getting, is that if you are not intentionally teaching your children about racism, they will learn racism, whether you are racist externally, you know, at this level or this level. And one thing that I really like, George Yancey, he talks about how as a white person, he's not white, but he's saying as a man, he can only ever be anti-patriarchal man, right? And as a white person, he says that the best that I can be as a white person is an anti-racist racist. And so I constantly have to be working on that. It's not ever going to go away. It's ingrained in me. And if I'm not intentional about working on it, I will never move beyond it. And I will always pretend that I'm not racist, but I am. And I think that that's really part of what we need to get to with our kids, is to understand as white parents of white children that the system, everything around us, it's in the air that we breathe, it's demonic. I want to say that loud and clear. It's demonic. Yeah. And if we are not being intentional about it, we are not in the spiritual warfare that exists around it.
Come on now.
So that's step one. And part of that is, like, in our churches, children's church should be talking about racism.
Come on, Gena.
That should be a part of our programs and our talks. And if we really do believe that this is demonic, then let's get in this spiritual warfare and let's start fighting this thing, because it's not going to happen if we sit back and let the world do it, or sit back and say, I'm not racist, so I'm not part of the problem.
Come on now.
I'm a white person, I'm part of the problem because I have lived off of the privileges of being a white person, and I will continue to do so. So we got to do that. And then next thing, from the pulpit, talk about racism.
Oh, yes, Lord.
Yes.
Whatever color you are, talk about racism.
Come on.
That's all.
All right, Antoine.
So another thing that I think is important is that it's your dinner table. So what we do is we gather, and we have programs, we have systems, and we have Christian entertainment, and we sit for an hour. Well, after the pandemic, we sit for 40 minutes. And we hear and we get all this information, but information never leads to transformation, right? So we're becoming smarter, and we're becoming able, and we got all this information at our fingertips. And now we have folks who are demonic being vocal. So racism, I agree totally. Racism is demonic. And so we don't speak to those things. So we sanitize it, right? So how I got to know Gena and her husband, Andrew, was literally not at church. It was in their homes. It was sitting around their dinner table.
Yeah.
It was being exposed and being uncomfortable at times, but learning to love each other like Christ did. So when you look at Acts chapter 2, they continued in the apostles' doctrine. That's the word of God. And they fellowship. So I think because you can do a sermon series on racism, but that doesn't change anybody. But that is part of it. It's like an awareness. You got to have an awareness. So what I'm seeing is that we can come together and we can, because some of it's not racism, some of it's cultural issues, right? So we can come together and we just have different cultures. But if we're not sharing life together, then only thing we're doing is pretending that we're a family. We're pretending that we're a community. So it's when James and Linette was talking, when Linette was saying, if you offer a solution, we literally sat with, like, we heard they were saying, and we did. We may not have had that experience, but you know, we have a heart. And when brother was about a fight with his son for his son, we literally waited, listened, and held that moment.
Antoine,
Yeah, repeat.
I need you to repeat everything you just said because you were breaking up. When you said when James, I'm sorry. Yeah. When you said when James and Linette were talking, can you start that over? Sorry.
Yeah, when so when they were talking, we in that moment, we didn't try to stop issues. We tried to move on. We get that moment, and I think sometimes we have a trouble doing allow people to feel. Am I here? You hear me?
Yeah, it's still breaking up. I apologize. Let's see.
Yes, move on to somebody else. That's the Lord telling me to shut up.
No,
okay, now we can hear you
now.
so
third time's the charm. In that moment.
Okay.
So in that moment, we held them, right?
Right.
So we didn't move on from the conversation. We weren't trying to butt in. We weren't trying to say, don't feel that way. We stayed with them. And I think and as uncomfortable as it is to hear that and to the anger that I feel, we held them. And sometimes what I see in churches, and I try to fight against it because, again, I'm not perfect. We reduce relationship to series. We reduce discipleship to programs. We reduce the human experience through 3 points and a close. And that's not what we need. What we need is to sit with James and Linette and like Gena, I heard this word, but she like almost patented it. It's like lament. It's like hold them and hold them in that moment and say, listen, I may not have that same experience, but I'm holding and I'm in tears and my heart breaks. And I might not have a white child, I may not have a black child, but I have children. And so I can have empathy because I hear what you said and it hurts me.
Right.
We don't have to move on to another series. We don't have to move on to another program. Can we hold each other? We have reduced the gospel of Jesus Christ to a cultural experience. No, this is transformational steroids. This is where the gospel was so unique because it brought the male, the female, the slave, the Jew, the Gentile, the Jew. I mean, it brought us together. And so we keep moving on. So what I'm talking to my pastor friends, both white and black, I don't want this just to be another moment. Let's start with dialogue. Let's start with conversation, but let's not end there. Let's invite each other to hard places and allow people to step on each other's toes. And the reality of it is, I have sinned, but here's the challenge. And this is where I shut up at. As long as I call sin, as long as I have a broad category as sin, I can pick and choose whether that's my issue or not. So that's then good. I drill it down a little bit more. So if I say, okay, we deal with lust, people will nod their head. It's like, yeah, everybody got lust in their heart and blah, blah, blah. So then if I say, okay, who's dealing with pornography? Everybody shuts up. Now, we just acknowledge that all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. Amen. Amen, preach, pastor. We just acknowledge that some of us deal with lust. Oh, that's good. That's good. That's good. But when I step on your toes, you get quiet.
That's right.
I don't deal with racism potentially because I'm going to step on your toes. And then what's connected to me stepping on your toes is buildings, budgets, because you can't tell me that you are not
come on
seeing
here.
Cain and Abel. This is what's crazy. Cain kills Abel, and his blood is crying out from the earth, and it reaches God. You mean to tell me, sir, that the blood of the folks who are being murdered in our streets are not crying out to God? You mean to tell me that we can? You mean to tell me that we can ignore it? Ignoring it doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
Come
And so while we keep
on.
burying our heads in the sand, I have an 18-year-old son that I have to teach how to respond to the cops. And so you may not have that experience, but can you mourn with me? Can you dialogue with me and try to right, wrong, or indifferent? Don't judge me. If this is my present reality and Jesus has not come, then mourn with me because of the sin that's plaguing me because of it. And that, my friends, and this is my heart, and y'all hear me, and I repent openly. See, I didn't lean into those spaces because I was fearful. And so I'm talking to pastors who are fearful into leaning into those spaces. You got to hear the cry of God's people. So diversity is not about assimilation to a culture. Diversity is literally saying, I got black, brown, and white people who are made in the image of God, the Imago Dei. I have to address all the issues that my people are dealing with. So I'm going to have to deal with the sexism that sometimes is in the church. And see, here's the part that I really want you to hear me. I'm not beating up the church. I love the church. I understand the church. I was raised in the church. The church has birthed me into the kingdom. But we, as flawed people, have to iron sharpens iron. So I don't get everything right. But when I listen to a Gena, I don't get everything right. But when I listen to a Linette and James, I don't get everything right. But what I'm trying to figure out is, okay, if you don't know the next steps, then first call me and let's just talk. I don't want to do another Facebook Live. I don't want to do another post to show solidarity. I'm saying, can we speak truth in love? And if you see the sin in me, call it out. But if I see the sin in you, I should call it out in love. And that's what the issue is. Yes. I think we need to teach our children. We need to make disciples. But the core of it is, if either I'm ignorant, okay, I get it, you don't see it, or I'm ignoring it. I see it, but I'm not going to address it. And that's a heart issue, because I want to get doctrine right. I want to get theology right. I want to get Christology right, how we view Christ. But every time I watch Christ, every time I read about his magnificent glory, I see him leaning into these hard places. I see him going against the religion. I see him leaning into it and speaking up for the women, speaking up for the minority, speaking up for the poor. So if Jesus is our example, then how far off are we? Man, I feel like preaching.
Oh my God, you are preaching.
You don't preach a good sermon there, sir. That's a mighty good offering.
Oh my God.
Oh, in that case, no, I'm just kidding.
My cash app is.
I said you deserve. Linette and James, how do you think, because I know you guys are both leaders in your church, in music ministry and probably other areas. What do you think the church can do to start having this dialogue and conversation pertaining to racial equality and injustice?
Well, I think, the church, it should and always be what your community looks to for leadership, and guidance. And it should never be one of those situations where, ignoring it or hoping it never happens in the church, or it's not happening around you, like with our church, Linette, we may have, 600 to 700 that flow through. Now, not here recently because of the quarantining and everything, but, we will have 600 to 700, members of the congregation flow through because we'll do multiple services. But I'm the only one. She will be the only black person on stage.
You the only one?
Only one.
Wow.
That's 100%, because, we got 2 kids that's 50. So I'm the only one that's registered. But yeah, and we may have some business visitors.
Yeah, some visitors, and but as far as full-time members, and she mentioned it earlier as well, but at our church, she is like that unicorn. I mean, she is loved. She is, if there's a weekend that she is not scheduled to sing, but it's a weekend that I'm scheduled for the bass. So, during the 9 o'clock service, everybody in the church, where's Linette at? Well, she's off this weekend, so she's not going to be here till the 11 o'clock service. It's it's my weekend. Oh, we miss her when she's not, and so it's one of them situations that do we in our church on a personal level, do we is it in any of our culture building, because we do a journey. We call it journey at our church, that if you want to serve in any form of the ministry, it might be in security, it might be the praise and worship team, the children's ministry, we do go through, what we call a journey. It's a 3-phase. It is really just filling you out, what the church foundation was built on, what we believe in, and and stuff like that. I won't say like bylaws or anything like that, because we do avoid the religion, as far as the stuff like that. But there's nothing that is as far as related to race, as far as racism,
you've been in the spirit, James,
or inequality or anything.
What did you say?
I said he's in the spirit, because that was going to be my next question. Like, does your church speak about injustice or deal with racial equality and things like that?
We do. There has been instances where it's been spoken about from the pulpit, but here again, I don't think we don't have it in our journey class, because it's not the experience. So, this is just like a hypothetical question, like, why would we talk about other races when there are no other races?
Right.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
it's like one of those things of, I don't need to talk about that, because everybody that comes here looks like me. So why are we discussing it? So that's why it's not in our journey. But our pastor has spoken about issues of race. And as you said, Antoine, before, when he did, and I never talked to you about this, when he did, I was on the worship team that Sunday, and I remember trying to not freeze. Because, like, sometimes my face is not saved all the time. So I just, I have to remember that it's not. So, like, either I look down, so if y'all ever watch our services and I'm looking down, something's happened. So I look down, or either I just remember that feeling of, like, that's how I felt. And so even though he was saying that we don't tolerate that, he was saying that is unacceptable here. I just remember feeling myself draw up, because I was uncomfortable, because I even though I wanted him to say it, I didn't want him to say it, because I was like, oh gosh, they're gonna be looking at me. Like, I just felt like I was doing this. So he does address it when it's something, it has to be major though. It's major. It's not like there's not an issue that's like a small thing. It was a major issue. But I feel like we should, because we do have visitors and we do have biracial children, and it's just, they're seen as Black if they're biracial. So I feel like we should talk about it, because as you said, April, most of the materials, they don't look like us, even though in the Bible, and I could be wrong, but it says burnt brass, lamb's wool. Like,
well,
so y'all ain't want to see this wool under here, honey.
That's what it said. Middle East, that's not like a covered place.
That's
It's hot. Burnt brass is dark. So that's what we've explained to our children. But we don't have pictures, because back in the day we used to have pictures up in our houses. Our grandmas, and everybody had the fans, and Jesus had long hair and looked like Robin Thicke did back in the day. Like, that's what Jesus looked like. Blue eyes, long hair, that side pose. That was Jesus.
Yeah.
So you have to make it known in order to discuss it. And if you skip around it, then nobody's going to talk about it. So if we're going to be biblical, we need to be biblical. And if we talk about territory and logistics of things, even if we didn't have to be biblical, we have to talk about the logistics of where Christ was. You know, that would tell a lot of people.
Yeah.
I mean, it would be real hard for somebody to be fair-skinned out there. It just would be. But that's another subject. I'm just saying we need to discuss it. We need to discuss it, and it needs to be part of every church, even in the all-Black church. We need to discuss it because there are more people like us, and there are more people that don't. They want to be together. Why are we so segregated in this hour? You know, you hear that the church hour is the most segregated hour, and it really is.
It is.
So we just need to talk about these things and feel uncomfortable in that moment of, we just need to get past it and say, okay, we got to do it. We got to keep pushing.
Because even
Gena,
though
what about? Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Go ahead, James. I'm sorry.
Even though there may not be events or situations that take place related to, you know, racism, whether it's, you know, members of your church or leadership or in the community, just because it's something that, you know, you're not hearing about or seeing doesn't mean it does not exist. So it's just it's just something that, okay, yeah, we may not be experiencing this because of where we live, you know, because we are 99% white. So I mean, it's just a matter of stats. You're going to have less situations and less events take place of racism situations because you don't have, you know, a multicultural, but it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Am I naive to think that I have, you know, family members, older generation family members, or friends, or people I hug and love at church that does not have some form of racism in them, just because they may not display it or expose themselves to us or church, doesn't mean when they go to work on Monday with their coworkers, you know, that they, or with their family members, that they do, that they aren't racist. They just aren't exposing it. That's why the church needs to have that, you know, as be part of the church, because it's one of them that we all can be whoever we want to be for 90 minutes on Sunday.
Come
Who
on,
are we?
Yep.
Who are we when we leave? And so if, you know, the church needs to make that stance, or, you know, as far as make that such an important piece, because
people may change.
Because if I was raised, and we talked about it earlier, if I was raised and indoctrinated that, you know what, Black people are inferior, and I grow up thinking that my whole life, it may be the church, because I may have grown up in that, you know, exposed to that my whole life. It may be the church that breaks me, and wakes me up, and just tears that wall down in my heart and my mind that, you know what, no, I have been living a lie my whole life. This is not how I should feel, and you know, and just that's just, you know, where I feel, you know, as far as related to that.
Bless it.
Hey, can I say something real quick? Can I say something real quick?
Antoine. Yeah.
So I think it's to James' point. So, in navigating these circles or navigating this thing, it's like no one wants to believe, the average church person. So language is important. So when you start off with, you know, racism, the first thing some people think of is the Klan, neo-Nazis, and so they immediately dismiss, like, I'm definitely not racist. Okay, well, that's why I think the church is uniquely equipped and designed to deal with it. Because remember, we're not saved because we're perfect. We're saved because we're sinners. So so when a person says, well, you know, I'm not racist, I'm not, you know, da. Okay, let's just dig a little deeper, because it's the little leaven that destroys the whole loaf. So there are things in my life that lead to that. So if we don't address it, I would even give you this. I'd rather for you to address it and build up to it. I'd rather for you to begin, but even with the pastor, like, it's going to be hard to address multicultural or multi-ethnic issues when all your friends look like you.
Yeah.
Like, if you don't seek out understanding, then
Mhm.
you're going to be speaking from your own experience.
Yeah.
So
Mhm.
my experience is, this is what my wife taught me. My wife taught me, stop trying to change how I feel. So if that's not what I meant to say, I'm trying to talk to Tanya about, well, why you feel upset? Because that's not what I meant. I got
Yeah.
to allow her to feel what she feels and stop
Right.
trying to convince her that's not what I mean. So sometimes in these circles, if I don't have the experience, then I don't feel qualified to speak on something that I don't have experience. But I was there when my wife gave birth. I don't want to give birth. I saw it, right? Looked
Mm.
painful. I don't have
Yeah.
to experience something to see it's painful. It looked painful.
Mm.
So all I got to
Yeah.
do is open up my dinner table, open up and seek out. There's a pastor that I know uh, from Pennsylvania, and he literally sought out, white guy, phenomenal guy. He sought out churches, watch this, that didn't have his fundamental beliefs. He sought out churches that didn't believe what he believed. He sought out pastors who didn't look like him to build relationships. So when I prayed to God, I want to see your kingdom. He didn't show me what I experienced.
Mm.
He put me in positions to see his kingdom, and his kingdom didn't look like Antoine. So I think
Mm.
if a
Mm.
pastor is struggling with, okay, where do I start? It
Mm-hmm.
starts with you and Jesus. Lord, what's
Mm.
in my heart that won't allow me? I speak about money. I speak about this. But what's in my heart that won't allow me to speak on those things that I'm not comfortable with? And that's why I think
Mm.
you got to start.
Gena, that's good, Antoine.
Yeah.
Um, One of the things that I think is important for us as white people to understand, and there's a new book out by a friend of mine that's called Rediscipling the White Church, and uh, I think that there's something very fundamentally wrong when we as white people, even if there's never a black person, a Latino person, an Asian American in our church. I think there's fundamentally something wrong if we never talk about racism even there, because
Mm.
racism as a demonic thing has negative effects on every single person that it touches.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
when we are trying to be mature Christians, we become more mature when we dig into this sin. And again, this is the sin of our
Mm.
forefathers. It's a sin of this
Yeah.
nation.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
It's a sin that allowed us to kill tons of Native Americans
Yes.
and
Mm.
and then allow us to build up a country on the backs of slaves. This touches all of us. And if we think that we have to have someone in our congregation that looks different than us for us to even talk about this, there's something fundamentally wrong with that. And we will never become mature Christians if we continue to think that way. And if we think that because that person's there, then we need to start talking about it. I'm not saying don't talk about it, but I'm saying if that's the thing that catalyzes us to do that, great. But we should have been doing it before,
Yeah.
because
Mm.
we become mature, we understand the gospel more, we understand who Christ is and who God is when we have more people at the table that don't look like us, because Antoine's experience is very different than mine, and I don't know that side of Christ that he's got to tap into because of his experience. And that's really important for us to understand and to get and to move with, I think.
That's good. I'm sorry, you guys. Can you
Amen.
hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Um,
Wow, that's
thank
I
you,
think April
guys.
had something to say.
good.
Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
April, I think you said you had something to say.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I'm over here about to explode. I've been quiet for a whole hour, and I'm just like
Yeah, I was wondering why you
jumping
were
up
so
and down.
quiet.
Yeah, no, because good conversation. I didn't want to interrupt, and I wish James and Linette kind of went off, but
Yeah, I'm
um,
hoping it did.
so many things I wrote down notes. My experience, I think, is different from everybody else on this call. I do not go to a multicultural church. My church is entirely black, including my not just my particular church, but even my
Okay.
church,
Hey.
my church
Okay.
covering, my bishop and the church that I'm a part of, collective, is, I guess I can say I've seen maybe one white woman that goes there occasionally, and her daughter would be considered black as biracial. Okay, so
Oh, keep going, April.
okay, all right. So having that my experience where I don't go to a multicultural church, but I have so felt like that does not excuse me from being aware that it is important for me to have a relationship, or at least talk about the
Yeah.
dynamic of my white and black brothers and sisters in the
Mm.
church, or even outside of the church. Like, yes, there is racism, because one thing that can happen with the predominantly black church or all black churches, we can talk on
Hmm.
the other end of the spectrum where the
Yes.
talk is more Black Panther-ish, and not, and
Yeah.
I don't want to say that that the Black Panthers were
Yeah.
all bad either. I'm talking about
Hmm.
more like militant, like you see how they treat us, you see how they, and where we
Hmm.
ostracize because Gena is white, even though she's Christian. That's why I don't even like that. I understand we have to categorize. I understand what you mean when you say white evangelical, but I feel like that's even a device of the devil, where he doesn't draw a line in the body of Christ, that the white Christians over there and black Christians over here, and the white
Hmm.
Christians don't like us, and us black people are just over here trying to defend ourselves. Um, but so many things when James was talking, he was talking about his son and how he reacted to the child that was bullying his son, and actually got off the bus. And wasn't thinking about, oh, well, this might not look right, and I need to kind of posture myself. He said that, I think he said something to the effect of, I did not want my son to have the testimony that my son didn't, when his son went through something, that my dad didn't take up for me. And the
Mm-hmm.
thing is,
Hmm.
we're having this testimony. We're family. We are a body. We say we have one father, but we're having a testimony to the world that when one side of us get bullied, the other side don't take up.
That's
Yes.
And
good.
so
Come
busy
on.
caring about how it looks,
Oh.
so busy trying to pander to, I don't want you to think I'm liberal, and I don't want you to think I'm too militant.
Mm-mm.
But later for that, it's like I ride for my family.
Right.
I ride for them.
Yeah.
And it don't matter. You can feel how you want to feel. We'll talk about it
Mm.
all niceties later. But when my children, or my mother, my father, my sister, my brother-in-law, whoever is in trouble, we riding together, and
Yeah.
we'll discuss it afterwards,
Yeah.
Right.
Good. Very
and
good.
kind of pan it all out. And I wish that would happen, that the testimony, think about, and y'all get me biblically right, but think about when Jesus was in the garden, and um, even though he was, not chastised, but I think was it Peter who cut the soldier's ear off?
Yeah, he was.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so Peter, at that moment, it wasn't like, well, let me make sure, I don't want to get arrested. He was like, hold up, you coming for Jesus? Now I got to hurt you. I don't care what you're
Right.
here for.
Yeah.
you know, and just the sentiment of that. I wish that would happen more in the body of Christ, and it is important. Just because, and this is blessing me, because even as all going to an all black church, which are predominantly black covering, we don't teach white people are our enemy, by no means. And a lot of times when incidences happen in the news, we lean toward more making sure that, okay, we make sure we have the spirit of forgiveness. But then we can't just only say whoever got affected, whoever was the victim, oh, make sure you forgive. But then we got to say, okay, those who were the assailants, make sure you're held accountable, though.
Hmm.
And it's just so much. I don't want to take up too much more time, but I just want to get that one point off. I think it's very important, and I'm not excused. I need to form relationships. I don't know if my church will ever just get white members, but I can still go to the church that's right down the street and introduce myself. I can find other Christian fellowships, at least where we're fellowshipping, where we have a meal, and I think that's important. But I love that what was brought out in that point of us just riding for each other.
Yeah.